showed up here.
This is well, any excuse to come to Santa Barbara, right?
Hey, why don't you give us an idea where you are physically?
Sure. Well, I appreciate everybody being here, especially on a Saturday, especially since you guys probably saw the website and said insurance. I spend my time talking about insurance. Well, and so thank you very much. And I want to let you know that I am here today as one of your biggest advocates. I'm not just a regular run-of-the-mill insurance guy that you guys are used to. I'm also a very active real estate investor. Been doing this for many years, flipping houses. I also run a turnkey property operation out of Kansas City, Missouri, which just so happens to be where the insurance company is based out. So we're gonna talk today about 13 insurance myths for real estate investors. So it's 13 that we've identified as some of the most prevalent myths. And I want to start off with a little survey just so I know who's here with me. And I've heard some of your stories, but who's actively flipping houses right now? If you use anybody wanting to get into that part of the business? Okay, all right. So who actively holds rental properties right now? If anybody want to get into that in the future, if you're looking. Okay. All right. Now the next one is really tricky, so you guys got to pay attention. I know it's your coffee's gonna sit in, but who finds insurance exciting? Like 4 of you. Wow, this is like one of the smallest groups and the most hands went up. It's amazing. You know, I spoke at Eddie Speed's Summer Summit in Texas last year, and I asked that same question, and I had 3 hands between 2 people. So one of them I think was just kind of being nice, the other one was a little bit crazy, I think. But I'm going to promise you one thing. I'm going to keep this kind of fast-paced, entertaining as much as possible, if you promise to keep engaged with me. Is that a deal?
Deal.
Sure. Okay, so let's define a myth. What do you guys think a myth is? Anybody?
Insurance is exciting.
All right, well, that's probably not, because really a myth is nothing more than a story or an idea that is believed by many, but it's really not true. Okay, so I don't think many people think insurance is exciting, so it wouldn't really fall into that myth category. But how many would agree that there are probably a lot of myths in the real estate investment space? Right, being perpetuated by the gurus, the guys who think they know something, the internet, everything. Right? So today we're going to dispel at least 13 of those. And I'm going to cover kind of a broad stroke of whether you're flipping, you're doing subject to deals, you're doing rental properties. We're going to talk a little bit about entities. So we're going to cover a whole bit of information, maybe take some notes, because it might not apply to you right now, but it may down the road you might want to ask some questions about it. So we're going to jump right into it. The first myth is insurance is exclusive of estate, tax, and financial planning. Now I see this kind of thing come up a lot on the social media platforms like Bigger Pockets, for example. If you're not on there, I recommend that you join. It's probably one of the more active and better places to learn, especially if you're not going to go spend the $10,000, $20,000 with these gurus. But I hear this question a lot because I have these keyword alerts, right? And they say, LLC or insurance. And the answer really is both. Okay? The key takeaway here is that you want to build a strong asset protection strategy first. And then also tie it in with your insurance. So you got to work with your CPAs, your attorneys, your tax advisors. You got to look at it this way. Insurance is really kind of like your archer in the watchtower. For those of you who are Game of Thrones fans or like old medieval times movies fans, I love this reference. Because you got to have your castle walls, right? You have your moat. Okay, those are your asset protection strategies, your attorneys, your tax preparers. And insurance just stands there on the castle walls, picking things off as they come at you. But it's not sufficient enough to stop them from getting into the good stuff, right? All your assets, all your things that you want to protect are inside the castle. You got to have it all together. Okay, does that make sense? So it's not one or the other. Okay, Dan talked about different types of entity structures. Of course, consult your professional advisors to see which one is right for you, but you gotta have them all together. All right, number 2, this is for anybody that's done subject to deals, or do you know what a subject to deal is? Besides Dan. Okay, so a subject to deal is essentially where you buy or acquire a property subject to the existing mortgage. So you don't take over it, You don't buy it, you talk to the owner, and they agree to essentially give you control of that property and leave the existing mortgage in place. And then what you do is you essentially would rent out that property, and then you would collect the rent minus the mortgage that you continue to pay, right? So that's one way to get into a property without any money down. But the myth here is that being named as additional insured on an existing homeowner's policy will sufficiently protect my interest on a subject to deal. So you'll agree that when you're taking interest in a property, you want to make sure that you're insured, your interests are insured. And the reason that people do it this way is because they have a fear of this due on sale clause being called on a mortgage. Anybody know what that is? Familiar with that? Because that's a big fear, right? Because if there's a change, a material change in the ownership of that property, the mortgage company could call that note due, and that's a big fear. But here's the problem. There's two ways that people normally structure these deals, and they're both wrong, and I'm going to explain it to you real quick. Okay, so the first way is they keep the mortgage or the homeowner's policy in place, and then they add themselves an additional insured. But the problem is that when there's a loss, the risk has changed because that home is no longer owner-occupied. So when there is a loss, you're giving the insurance company the right to deny any claims because there has been a material change in the exposure. Now it's tenant-occupied, so the homeowner's form no longer applies and any claims are excluded. So you think you have this security, but you really don't. Now, in the event of some miracle and the insurance company does pay out something, who's going to get that money? Who's going to get that settlement? The homeowner. Right, it's not going to be you. Only the first named insured gets that settlement. So again, you're having this set up this way in fear of this dual on sale clause, but you have absolutely no protection. Now the second scenario, the next investor gets a little bit smarter and decides, you know what, I need to be listed as the named insured. So you leave the existing homeowner's policy in force, but then they go out and they get their own insurance policy with them listed as the named insured. Not realizing that insurance companies are smart, right? And they're not in the business of paying claims, they're in the business of making money. And in their contracts, they both have an in excess clause, which state that they will only pay in excess of the other company if there are two insurance policies in force. So how long do you think it's going to take for them to kind of agree and mediate to see who's going to be responsible to pay that claim? You're going to be waiting quite a while. And then again, if it's the homeowner's insurance policy that decides that they're the ones who are going to pay it, now you're, again, not going to receive any of that settlement because they might be a nice person, but when it comes to money, they're not just going to hand it over to you. So the right way to do it and the way that we structure these is we create a landlord-type commercial policy or coverage form, listing you as the named insured, the homeowner as the additional insured, and the mortgage company as the mortgagee. We've been doing it this way for about 14 years and never had a dual sale clause called because the mortgage company still sees that that borrower is listed on the insurance documents. So that's the right way to do it. But you're the first name insured, so the claim settlement goes to you. That make sense? Okay. Myth number 3. Buying a property in your personal name and using your homeowner's policy is fine. Anybody agree with that? So some people think that they can extend liability from their homeowner's policy. And part of the takeaway here and what we're going to dive into is that once you're getting into rental properties or flips or anything that generates income for you like that, even if it's just a rental property, the IRS considers anything that generates income for you as a business activity or a business exposure, therefore being a business liability. So you've got to separate any of your personal activities and liabilities like your home, your autos, and those sorts of things away from your business activities and liabilities, like your rental properties and anything having to do with your investment activities. Because you got to treat it as a business, right? That's the only way that you're going to be successful and grow and scale anything to a decent amount to where you can pay for your kids' college education and your cruises and all your different things that you want to do in life, is by treating it as a business. So that's the key takeaway here is you've got to separate those personal liabilities away from your business activities. And this myth number 4 kind of parlays into 3 and 5 as well. But the personal dwelling fire policy, for any of you who have rental properties, if you're insuring them with a personal lines carrier like a State Farm or Allstate or Allied or all those different guys, right? They use what's called a dwelling fire policy. That's either a DP1 form or a DP3 form. And the myth is that this is sufficient to cover your non-owner occupied rental. This goes into the whole aspect of personal liabilities versus business liabilities. And one of the things that these have, besides commingling your liabilities and your assets, is they have what's called a total pollution exclusion on all their contracts. And the reason that insurance exists and all the different types that exist is because at some point, somewhere down the line, there was an incident that occurred, and then they created an insurance policy for it, right, or some kind of coverage for it. So one of the things that happens is exposure to CO2 from a heating or air conditioning source. Your tenant claims, whether he's just an ambulance chaser or whether it really happens, he claims that he got sick or injured by exposure from CO2. That's considered a pollutant, and it's excluded under all the dwelling fire policies. Under the right kind of commercial policy like ours, we buy back that exclusion, which gives you not only the right to claim settlements, but one thing that's important is defense costs. I'll give you an example. In my previous insurance life, I did a lot of insurance for farm owners here in Ventura County. We're still a big ag community. And there was a jogger going by one of our clients' fields, and they were spraying. Well, he claimed that he got sick and he had all these issues, and once they investigated, it turned out that they were spraying the field with some saline-based solution that had absolutely no chemicals or anything in it. So all they have to do is claim that something happened, and now you're stuck with the burden of proving that you're not liable, and you have those defense costs. So that's the benefit of having coverage on your policies. It at least gives you defense costs up to the limit as well as settlement charges. All right, myth number 5. I have a personal umbrella policy, so I don't need commercial insurance. Anybody been told that they need, an umbrella policy for their rentals or their liability or anything?
So for the rental, but my husband has it for his nursing license.
Okay, yeah, so for his business, you have an additional umbrella. So same thing with any kind of liability. So that's another misconception, because again, an umbrella policy or personal umbrella, it's still just liability. That's all an umbrella policy is. You have your, on your personal line side, you have your home, you have your auto, and you have liability limits under those policies, right? Whatever they might be. And to have an umbrella, you have to have certain minimum limits. On a home, it's typically a minimum of $300,000. On your autos, it's typically a minimum of $500,000 before you can actually garner an umbrella. But the umbrella just sits there dormant until there's a claim, and if that underlying liability under your homeowners, for example, is exceeded, say you have $300,000 and something happens where you injure somebody and they settle at $500,000, well, now that homeowner's policy is going to pay $300,000, and then the umbrella comes in and pays the additional $200,000. But all it does is just sit there. It doesn't protect the property, it doesn't do anything, it's just liability. So it covers over it. So a question often comes up, well, how much do I need to carry? How much should I carry? Everybody tells you you get $1 million umbrella. Well, maybe you don't need it yet. Okay? And the rule of thumb that I like to use, or the metric, is you figure out what your actual net worth is. And this, of course, is going to apply for your personal liabilities and also your business liabilities, right? You can apply these to both. But you figure out what your net worth is. Only you know that. Your potential perceived net worth, right? How many people think that real estate investors have a large perceived net worth, even if they're not making money or losing money or breaking even, or they just got their teeth kicked in on a deal? Yeah, perceived net worth, right? Because you're in real estate. Same thing with farmers. Farmers own all this land. They might be losing money hand over fist, but they have a big perceived net worth. And then your potential future net worth. So you take those 3 metrics, and then we say, just make your insurance policy at least as attractive as whatever that is. And you gotta understand that when there's a claim, the claimants have 10 years to come back and file against you. So maybe right now, your business is just barely starting, and you don't have much. You don't have much of a net worth. But they keep an eye on you. 5, 6, 8, 10 years later, now you're a millionaire. They can always come back. So you gotta make sure that you factor in those things with the amount of liability that you carry. Does that make sense? Okay, both business and personal. All right, number 6. This will kind of apply more as you start buying properties and getting rental properties. But one of the myths is that a claim that occurred before I owned the property shouldn't affect my insurance rate. And this was always the case, and this is just kind of a for instance for you to be aware of, so that if you do go get a proposal from one of these companies, just know that every time they look at a property, they run what's called a clue report. And they're going to see all the past history. It's kind of like an MVR for viewing your accidents or your cars. It's the same type of thing. It's a comprehensive loss analysis report for that particular home. It's not necessarily a claim that you filed, but any losses that happen on that home. And before it used to be that they would typically just verify that those repairs were done if they saw something happen there. But now they can also surcharge you as the new buyer if a claim has happened. So you want to be aware of that and work with a company who doesn't do that. Okay. Now, number 7, we're going to spend some time on this slide, and we're going to, again, I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but these are the main elements of your policy, of your property insurance contracts. Okay. Here you have your policy forms, basic, broad, and special. The two most common are basic and special. And I'm going to bore you with the details, but we're going to go into that. Actual cash value and replacement cost. Anybody heard of those? Okay, those are your loss settlement provisions. And then co-insurance. Anybody heard of that term? Usually everybody shakes their head and the room is quiet. But that's one of the things that affects the way that you insure your properties the most, so we're going to get into that. Now, the main thing between basic and special form, other than there's about a 30% difference in rate, is the perils that are covered. Those are the things that are going to be covered under your contract. So basic form gives you the 13 basic perils that you're concerned with. Things like wind, hail, fire, lightning, civil commotion, sinkholes, airplanes and cars and falling objects. And tornadoes that fall. Tornadoes fall under wind, the windstorm category. Not to be confused with named storms. That's always a separate coverage. A named storm is a hurricane, a tropical storm or a hurricane that comes through, and then all of a sudden they put a name to it. Now all of a sudden all your wind damage is excluded. As soon as they put a name to it. Okay,
Is there a policy for that though, after it's?
So then you have to go and buy named storm coverage. If you didn't have named storm coverage, then all that's excluded. But just know that there's 3 different tiers in the way that they rate the states, right? You get tier 3 states, like California, basically every other state that's not really susceptible to hurricanes, tier 3 states. Places like the Carolinas and Florida and the coasts up there, those are either tier 1 or tier 2 states. Tier 1 are the most dangerous for hurricanes. Tier 2 is also dangerous, but a little bit less dangerous. So when you have those 2 things, your agent should be advising you that you should at least consider it. It's just like in California, earthquake is always excluded. You have to buy earthquake coverage separate. Same thing in those other states with hurricanes. Okay, but tornadoes are still not considered anything extra. It's still just wind damage and cover. So what happens when you go up into special form? So special form, you buy back a few extra important things like water damage. Water damage is defined in the insurance contract as a sudden and accidental discharge of water. So it's not things like negligence because you left the window open during a rainstorm and water got driven in. Like that's not going to be covered because they think you should be smart than to do something like that. Things like major theft, things like weight of ice and snow, which is pertinent in certain markets, right? Indianapolis, that could be it's a very good investment market. Kansas City, Missouri, where I'm at, that's a good investment market that they get snow and they get cold. So those are the things to consider. So those are the main things that you get with special form. And then when we propose coverage, of course, or at least when I do, I go over every single little detail so you understand what it is that you're getting. You should expect that from whoever you're working with. Now, actual cash value and replacement cost. These are loss settlement provisions, and people get confused by the fact that they think they have replacement costs, so that means that the insurance company is going to pay whatever it takes to rebuild their house if it burns down. That's what a lot of people think it means. But all it is that it's a loss settlement provision that states that in the event of a loss, the insurance company is going to pay to repair or replace this item without factoring in depreciation. With actual cash value, the insurance company has the right to factor in any kind of applicable depreciation based off of that damaged item's useful life, whatever the useful life might be. So they might depreciate at a certain percentage. Now, the thing to understand is that every claim is first settled on an ACV basis. So in some cases, in many cases, ACV value is sufficient. But when it's not, then that's where the RC value comes in, and they'll pay up to that full replacement cost value. Does that make sense? Now, they used to have a thing called guaranteed replacement cost. And that's where people got this idea that it meant that they're going to have their properties replaced, right? Well, what happened? Hurricane Ike and Hurricane Andrew hit the Carolinas and Florida and wiped out thousands of insured locations. A bunch of insurance companies went out of business. A lot more got severely hurt. So guess what happened? There goes the guaranteed replacement cost, and then that's when they created co-insurance. And co-insurance is nothing more than an underhanded way for insurance companies to force you to insure at a higher level and therefore collect more premium from you, right? And anybody that's tried to insure a property before, whether it's their home or rental property, this is kind of the way the process works. You submit the information to the insurance guy, they come back and they tell you, based off of what you told us, you should insure your home for $300,000. They don't really give you an option. That's what you got to do. And as an investor, you might think to yourself, well, hang on a second, especially if it's a rental property. I only paid $150 for it. I can rebuild it for $130. I don't want to insure it for $300,000. And then they tell you, and they usually don't tell you, but then they would tell you if you were asking those questions. Well, based off of our co-insurance requirement, depending on the company, you have to insure for either 80, 90, or 100% of this value that they told you, which they come up with usually a Marshall and Swift or something.
Is that just if you have a mortgage, but if it was paid for free and clear, you'd have more of a choice?
No. No, they don't care about your mortgage. They're doing it based off of their replacement cost estimation. And it's usually inflated. Okay, and that's one of the ways that they charge more premium, right? Because they're having you carry a higher value. Yes, sir.
When you say co-insurance, does that mean there's more than one insurance company involved in this? What is the code?
Well, because they're having you participate in a higher level of insurance. So that's like the difference between the total insured value and then the percentage that they say that you have to be insured for. So it might be 80% of that value or 90% of that value. It just depends on what their contract says. Most companies say they give you up to 80% of that. So if you want to insure 20% below, then you can still do that without a penalty. But as soon as you start saying, no, I want to insure for 150, now there's a claim, now that's where the co-insurance penalty comes in. And if they say that you're 40% underinsured, then they're going to reduce your claim settlement by 40%. So that's kind of how they stiff arm you into carrying those higher limits, because in case there's a claim, you don't want to have that claim reduced, right? So they take away that option, and we don't like that as investors. The other thing that their contract states is that in order for you to get that up to that $300,000 that they have you insured for, you have to repair or rebuild the structure. But in many cases, especially in certain markets that we're buying houses in, it may make more sense to just take a cash settlement and go buy something else next week and start cash flowing right away than waiting a month, a year, or maybe sometimes more. Right? If you have really good crews, they can rebuild it in a month. It might not make sense for you to be tied up rebuilding that property. But same thing, because their contract says that you have to repair or rebuild. If you choose a cash settlement, and the insurance companies that allow you, they'll take 40 or 50% of it.
So co-insurance is just another name for extra money for them.
Sure. So again, understanding what these mean and what they are will help you make the right decision, because there's a lot of investors that go with an actual cash value basic form policy because it makes sense. I insure a lot of properties in Detroit. They're all on ACV basic form. There are a lot of properties in Kansas City, a lot of properties in Indianapolis and Ohio, and all over the place. We have properties in all 50 states. We insure over 43,000 locations nationwide, just on rental properties. So we see them all. And based on your business model and what your aversion to risk is, you can choose, right? Because our program is more of a kind of an a la carte insurance program, so you can pick and choose what you want to insure for, which coverages you want to pair with which properties, so you have more options, because we put these programs together ourselves. Okay, so that was a pretty important slide. Any questions on that? Dan?
If somebody came to you and said, well, you know, it's only costing me $500 for this insurance policy, or it's costing $500, but you can do it for free, if they gave you the insurance policy, would you be able to go through and redline it and say, well, this is why you're paying this, and this is what you're, you know, and then you'd really be able to have a good idea of
Sure.
what you're comparing? You would do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We do that all the time. And, excuse me, I insure a lot of very large portfolios. We work with all the biggest turnkey providers out there. We work with the fortune builders and the rich dad, poor dads, and the Mr. Landlords, and all the guys that have thousands of locations down to the guys that just have one, right? And so that's what we do. If you have an existing something, we'll review, tell you what you're not getting, what you should be getting, and if there's a price, because there's always a difference in premium, right? Sometimes we're more affordable, sometimes we're not as affordable, sometimes we're equal, but what are you getting overall? And we're gonna talk about that a little bit.
So you package up a insurance proposal for the whole ball of wax or for individual
Yeah,
parts?
and I'll explain how the program works at the end, but yeah, I'll tell you exactly how that works. All right, myth number 8, self-insurance is too risky. Any idea who propagates that myth?
Insurance companies.
Everybody always gets that one right. It's amazing. Yeah, the insurance companies. So, who would agree that your deductible is a way of self-insurance? This is where you say yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so your deductible is a way of self-insurance, right? It's one of the ways that you have control over your rate to a degree, right? And in general terms, the higher the deductible, the lower the premiums. Of course, there has to be a point where, you know, where does it make sense to stop, right? Because at some point, if you go too high, it might not make that much of a difference to go between a $5,000 deductible and a $10,000 deductible. But again, it just depends. I have clients that have large portfolios, and not only do they carry $10,000 deductibles on all their portfolio, they have some properties that they self-insure altogether because they have those reserves and they're cutting costs, right? Because your insurance premiums are also a top of loss. Not just, you know, so you have to factor in how you can mitigate those things in a smart way. Now, anybody think it's a good idea to self-insure on the liability side? Okay, good, I'm glad nobody was saying that. Okay, so liability, most people are only focused on their property, right? If something happens to my property, that's where all my stuff is. I want to make sure that that's repaired. But what they don't realize is that where people get wiped out are not property losses, they're liability losses. Especially in the litigious society that we live in, right? I mean, $1 million is nothing anymore. People carrying $100,000 liability on their rental properties, it scares me. I don't know how they sleep at night, because any little tiny thing, and that's gone, and now they're coming after you personally. So, under our program especially, you can get $1 million liability for a location for a month for $6. So even if you own a property, if you're going to own a property even for a day or 2 days, if you're doing an assignment or something like that, but you actually own it, you want to call us or whoever you're working with and get liability insurance so they can offer liability only on that property. Because if something were to happen in that period of time that you own it, that week that you own it, and then they come back 2 years later to see who it was, they're going to come after you. And if you didn't have insurance, guess who's going to be on the hook? So it makes sense. Yes?
When you say own it, you mean as in having your name or your business name recorded on the deed in the county?
Yeah. If there's a record that you own that property, even for a short period of time, if you're doing just a basic kind of contract assignment where you sold the contract, there may not be a record that your entity owned that property if you're doing it that way. But if you actually did like a double close or did something like that, there's going to be a record of it. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about claims reporting. And I'll tell a little story. Because people like stories, and we're like halfway through here, so give you a little treat. So Dan has this tenant that he loves. And she's a nice old lady, He's always paid the rent on time, you know what I'm talking about. Always pays